On today's vlog, we're going to be talking about another production yacht builder, Wally. Now, I've always seen these yachts floating about, but I've never really known much about them. Today, I'm only going to talk about the motor yachts, as the sailing and the racing is a whole other story, and I don't particularly want to get into that now. But back in 2019, they actually joined forces with the Ferretti Group to help invest and develop their ranges. So let's see what kind of changes this iconic shipyard has gone through. The first yacht to be released after this alliance between Wally and the Ferretti Group was the 48 Wally Tender. This was later followed by the 48 Wally Tender X, which is the outboard version, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now, being the first yacht to be launched after this partnership, it's very much going to set the scene for what we can expect in the future. But it's really nice to see that they're sticking strong to that iconic DNA that's made these boats so popular and almost fashionable. One of the main differences is that they are now kitted out with two Volvo Penta IPS 650 engines. These give a top speed of about 38 knots, and as we already know, are great for efficiency and maneuverability, but they will allow for that little bit of extra space which makes such a big difference on a boat of under 15 meters. And actually, considering that this, at its purest form, is a day boat, optimized to have the best performance and most fun out in the open air possible, she's got a pretty considerable amount of interior space with a full cabin and shower. The deck space is pretty versatile as well, with a decent amount of seating and lounging spots, as well as the alfresco dining space, which has got a very well equipped galley. They've also put in quite a handy feature here. The aft bench can either be facing forward or aft, depending on whether you want to get involved in a tasty lunch or just get stuck into the incredible performance that she has to offer. She also features the typical retractable passerelle that doubles as a swim ladder. What is new, and actually never seen before in this bracket, are the fold down bulk walks to open up a little bit more space to play around with. Another new feature is the special Bezenzoni anchoring system. This has an extendable arm that's hidden away in this little nose cap, and then once a button is pressed at the helm station, drops down into the water. Let's talk a little bit more about performance, and this is probably a good point for me to mention the outboard. So instead of the Volvo Penta engines, Wally have gone for four 450 horsepower Mercury Verado racing engines. These pretty much double the power in comparison to the inboard, from about 960 to 1800 horsepower. That's a lot of horses for a boat that only weighs about 11 tons. But of course, more is better, and in this case, more means a top speed of 55 knots. I've read that these Mercury engines are the most powerful you can get and are also very lightweight, so it's no surprise that the outboard, with such a high overall power to weight ratio, is pushing a top speed of 60 knots. Wally has always been associated with high performance yachts, but the founder of Wally has actually said that these are the best Wally Tenders that they've ever built. And what's more is that they're cheaper than the previous models, with the inboard coming in at just under €900,000. The 43 Wally Tender is the younger and smaller sibling to the 48. It has all of the same classic Wally styling and plumb bow, which now, like the 48, has the anchor hidden away in this little nose cap. But how does the 43 really differentiate from the 48? Well, in a couple quite significant ways actually. Firstly, the central cockpit is much more protected. It's got a different seating layout to the 48, which is largely part of the reason, but it features this wraparound glass windshield, which is actually one piece of glass with an angular bend in it. And then of course the hardtop, which is actually made out of a laminated sailcloth in order to maintain that sort of open air sensation. Secondly, and probably most significantly, is its configuration. I've read it being called the Swiss Army knife of tenders, and actually that's a very good name for them as they are such versatile boats. With this cockpit setup, once the table's been lowered, there's now an open space behind the driver, so it can be used as a support vessel to transport equipment such as backup sails, for example. Or once the table's in its raised position, it can be used as a tender or a shuttle for the mothership. I mean, in reality, one can use their boat for whatever they want, obviously. But my point is that there's no one strict configuration for this boat, or use even more so than the 48. They provide all sorts of options that can be changed or stored away when not in use. You can choose to have a garage for your toys if you want to use it for water sports. You can choose further galley facilities. There's even a shower compartment and a miniature cabin. Then there are things like the Seakeeper stabilizer system, the automated passerelle, and a choice between either 380 or 440 horsepower Volvo Penta diesel engines, providing predicted top speeds of around 35 and 40 knots respectively. The Y200! This is a very cool yacht. I've got to say I'm a big fan of this one, hence the dramatic entrance. The only thing is there's a lot that I want to say and not masses of imagery, so I'll try not to ramble too much. The first thing I'd like to mention is its sheer size. This really is the perfect example of a wide-bodied yacht. I mean, it's pretty much full beam from the windscreen's highest point all the way back. With an enormous beam of 7.6 meters, she clocks in at just under 200 gross tons, which equates to, on average obviously, about 50% more living space in comparison to yachts of the same size. And yet they were still able to keep the yacht registration below the 24-meter load line. All I know is that it keeps the running and berthing costs down, so here's Giorgio Gallo from Rena to tell you a bit more about how one determines the load line.
So we are frequently facing to the determination of the load line length for yachts. And we all know that there are a huge number of reasons for which we are facing now with this new length, which is different from the maximum waterline length, is different from the overall length, and is different from the length between perpendiculars. Why? Because according to the International Convention on the Load Line, this length is measured at a water line corresponding at the 85% of the least molded depth. So, the most important thing is to define which is the upper deck. And based on the definition, the position of the upper deck and the deck that can be considered the load line deck, in the freeboard deck, in this case we have to calculate the minimum depth corresponding to this deck. So, measured the minimum depth, we have to calculate the 85%. After this, we have to draw on the plan of the yacht the corresponding water line and to take the measurement from the forward side of the stem and on the aft side of the transom. Calculated this length, we have to define the 96%. This is one of the load line length measured. Now we have to compare this measurement with the same waterline length from the forward side of the stern to the axis of the rudder stock. The longest of these two lengths need to be considered as the official load line length of the yacht.
Wally have turned their attention into creating a hybrid yacht that conveys the comfort and space of a much larger displacement yacht, but still has the speed advantages of a semi-displacement yacht. Together with the naval architecture by Laurent Giles, they've created a functionally designed hull that can deliver very high levels of comfort at any speed. With the standard Volvo IPS pod propulsion package of 4 D13 IPS 1050 800 horsepower units, she'll have a top speed of 20 knots whilst in hyper displacement mode, and at more economical lower speeds of 10 knots whilst in long range displacement mode, she'll have a range of 1000 nautical miles in comparison to a range of 410 nautical miles whilst at the cruising speed of 17 knots. I say standard as there's also an option for 4 1000 horsepower D13 IPS 1350 units, which would have a top speed of 23 knots. Let's have a look inside, starting at the main deck, as it has two of my favorite features. Firstly, the owner's cabin, which as you can see is just an incredible space. Imagine waking up to these views. Then heading further aft, we are met by a huge full beam lounge, where they've removed the external walkways to allow for such an open space. And actually, the yacht's got very high freeboards with the mooring at the upper deck. So this also opens up much bigger interior volumes, but also means for a much drier yacht. Being a Wally, the lounge has multiple configurations depending on how you'd use the yacht. The only constant is this central carbon staircase that links all the decks together. Down at the lower deck, you can choose between 3 or 4 cabins, but what's more is the huge amount of space that the crew get. Unfortunately, there aren't any images here, but you can get a vague idea of the vast size of their quarters from this layout image. And finally, this incredible beach club. It is enormous, and with the 2 concealed garages, there's also masses of storage space for the tenders and toys. One level up at the main deck, there's this great inside-outside dining space thanks to the huge overhang of the upper deck. I might add that this has no supports, which means that there's complete uninterrupted, almost panoramic views. And then of course, with a big overhang comes a big deck. And at the upper deck, there's the helm station, the sky lounge, and another alfresco dining spot with a bar and plenty of lounging spots. These are just such clean and versatile yachts. I love the fact that they actually take into consideration that one's needs do in fact change, and they allow for these different configurations. I actually read that Wally is the only shipyard ever to have won the Compasso d'Oro twice. Now, Compasso d'Oro literally means the golden compass and is the world's most notable award when it comes to design and quality. And who knows, now with the new models out, they might have another one coming their way. Also, I wanted to talk about another yacht, another concept of theirs, the 165 Wally Power. Now, unfortunately, I ran out of time, but this does look like an incredible yacht. It's a 50-meter designed by Espinono. So check it out. I guarantee you will not be disappointed.